On her wedding night, her millionaire husband left for a business trip. She spent the night alone waiting. By morning, a truth was revealed that changed her life forever. My beautiful family, this is one of the most powerful woman stories you will ever hear. A great family, a strong woman who refused to cry, and a husband who ended up begging for her love. Before we begin, I send a prayer to you. May God crown your life with success, fill your home with joy, and grant your heart's deepest desires. Do me a favor, my beautiful family. Smash that like button and comment, "I am with my brother." Now, let's step into a storm of betrayal, heartbreak, and unstoppable power. A story you will never forget. Love is not what you say in daylight, but what you choose in darkness. The cathedral bells had finished their wedding song hours ago. Yet Thesara sat alone in her bridal chamber, silk petals scattered across marble floors like fallen tears. Her wedding dress, a masterpiece of ivory satin and ancestral lace, felt heavier with each passing moment. The jasmine garlands that had crowned her beautiful dark skin now seemed to mock her with their sweet fragrance. She had imagined this night 1,000 times. Rafferty's gentle hands removing her veil, his whispered promises of forever, the beginning of their life as one. Instead, she faced only shadows and silence. The crystal champagne flutes they were meant to share sat untouched on the mahogany table, the golden liquid now flat and lifeless. Thesara's fingers traced the rim of one glass, remembering how Rafferty had smiled when he chose them. "For our first toast as husband and wife," he had said with those piercing blue eyes that had captured her heart. Now those same eyes were fixed on another woman, somewhere in the city, while his bride waited in their matrimonial bed like a forgotten prayer. She rose from the velvet chair and moved to the tall windows overlooking the estate gardens. The moonlight painted everything silver, transforming the roses into ghostly sentinels. Her reflection stared back, a stunning woman of 28, with skin like burnished bronze and eyes that held depths of intelligence and grace. Her grandmother's diamond necklace caught the light, each stone a reminder of the legacy she carried. Thesara Delancey came from a line of strong women who had faced far worse than this humiliation. "Mrs. Thesara Whitmore," she whispered to her reflection, testing the name that had become hers just hours ago. It felt foreign on her tongue, like wearing clothes that belonged to someone else. She had given up her maiden name, her independence, her trust, all for a man who couldn't even spend their wedding night in the same room. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight, its deep resonance echoing through the empty chamber. Each note felt like a nail in the coffin of her illusions. Thesara had defended Rafferty to her concerned family, insisting that his occasional distance was merely the pressure of managing his family's vast business empire. She had explained away the late-night phone calls, the mysterious appointments, the way his eyes sometimes seemed to look through her rather than at her. Her wedding bouquet lay wilted on the dressing table, the white orchids and African violets, chosen to represent both their heritages, now brown at the edges. She picked up one of the violets, its purple petals soft between her fingers. Her mother had insisted on including them, saying, "A woman must never forget where she comes from, especially when she enters a world that might try to make her feel she doesn't belong." The words now carried prophetic weight. Thesara's mother had sensed something that her daughter, blinded by what she thought was love, had missed entirely. The subtle comments from Rafferty's friends about exotic beauty, the way his business associates spoke to her as if she were decorative rather than intelligent, the assumption that her Georgetown degree was somehow less impressive because of her background. All the warning signs had been there, disguised as compliments and buried beneath surface politeness. She thought about the prenuptial agreement she had signed, trusting Rafferty's assurances that it was just a formality. Now she understood it had been his escape route, carefully planned long before he had proposed. The document that she had signed without legal representation would leave her with minimal assets if their marriage dissolved. A safety net that suggested he had never intended their union to be permanent. But what Rafferty had failed to calculate was that Thesara's strength had never depended on his money or his family name. Her grandmother had built a successful catering business from nothing. Her mother had earned a master's degree while raising 3 children alone. And Thesara herself had graduated summa cum laude while working 2 jobs. The Delancey women had always created their own paths, and tonight marked the beginning of her most important journey. Thesara's mind drifted to the reception, how Rafferty had danced with her for exactly 1 song before excusing himself for important business calls. She had continued to smile, to accept congratulations from his family's friends and business associates, playing the perfect bride while her heart slowly cracked like ice in spring. His mother Miriam had watched with knowing eyes, and his sister Juniper had seemed almost apologetic in her forced cheerfulness. The bedroom door remained stubbornly closed, and Thesara finally understood that it would stay that way all night. She moved to the bed and sat on its edge, still in her wedding dress, still waiting for a husband who had already chosen his destination for the evening. The silk sheets were turned down in anticipation of love that would never come, pillows arranged for 2 heads that would never share them. As the night deepened, Thesara felt something shifting inside her chest, not breaking, but hardening. Like carbon under pressure, her pain was crystallizing into something else entirely. She thought of her grandmother's stories about surviving in a world that tried to diminish strong women, about finding power in places others overlooked. "Tomorrow begins today," she whispered to the empty room, her voice steady despite the tears that finally came. They were not tears of weakness, but of mourning, for the naive woman she had been that morning, for the marriage that had died before it truly began, for the trust that lay shattered like her champagne flute would soon be. The clock chimed 1, then 2, then 3. Thesara never moved from her position, still and elegant as a statue, absorbing the full weight of her abandonment. By dawn, she would be transformed. By sunrise, the naive bride would be gone forever, replaced by someone far more dangerous. "This is not my end," she finally spoke aloud, as the first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains. "This is my beginning." Chapter 2. The Armor of Dignity. Strength is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. Dawn painted the estate in shades of gold and crimson as Thesara finally rose from her vigil. She had not slept, but she had emerged from the night with crystalline clarity about her situation. Her wedding dress hung heavy with the weight of broken dreams, but she removed it with ceremonial precision, folding each layer as if laying her former self to rest. In its place, she chose a deep emerald dress that complemented her rich skin tone, armor disguised as elegance. The soft knock on her door came precisely at 7:30, just as Thesara finished applying her makeup with the skill of a master artist. Each stroke of her brush was deliberate, transforming any trace of her sleepless night into radiant composure. When she called "Enter," her voice carried the authority of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. "Mrs. Whitmore," the young servant girl stammered, balancing a silver breakfast tray with shaking hands. I have your morning meal." Thesara studied the girl's face with the intensity of a chess master, reading her opponent's strategy. The servant's nervous glances toward the untouched bed, her inability to meet Thesara's eyes, the way her voice caught on "Mrs. Whitmore." Every detail confirmed what Thesara already knew. This girl had been coached on what to say, prepared for questions about her master's absence. "Where is my husband this morning?" Thesara asked, her tone conversational yet commanding. The girl's hands trembled more violently, nearly dropping the crystal juice glass. Sir had to leave very early for urgent business. He said to tell you he would return soon." Thesara accepted the tray with gracious hands, noting how the girl flinched at her steady gaze. "Thank you for delivering his message so faithfully. What is your name?" "Lily, ma'am." "Well, Lily, you may tell anyone who asks that I received the message with perfect understanding." Thesara's smile could have cut glass. Perfect understanding indeed. As Lily hurried away, clearly relieved to escape, Thesara set the tray aside and prepared for her first performance as the abandoned bride who refused to play the victim. She understood now that this morning would set the tone for everything that followed. The family would be watching, measuring her reaction, deciding whether to offer pity or respect. Thesara had no intention of earning the former. She studied her reflection one final time, adjusting the emerald dress that made her skin glow like burnished gold. The woman staring back was not the broken bride they expected to see, but someone who had spent the night discovering reserves of strength she never knew she possessed. Her grandmother's diamond earrings caught the morning light, reminding her that Delancey women had always risen to meet their challenges with grace and dignity. The hallway outside her room was unusually quiet, with several staff members lingering nearby under the pretense of cleaning tasks they had clearly already completed. Thesara recognized their curiosity for what it was. The household staff had heard whispers about the master's absence and were eager to witness the young mistress's reaction. Their sympathy was written across their faces like an open book. She descended the grand staircase with the bearing of a queen approaching her throne, her heels clicking against marble with military precision. Each step echoed through the mansion like a declaration of war. The sounds drew attention from various family members, who appeared in doorways and peered around corners to observe her descent. The breakfast room buzzed with the kind of forced normalcy that follows family catastrophes. Rafferty's mother Miriam sat at the head of the table, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her pale blue eyes sharp with intelligence and something that might have been respect. His sister Juniper picked at her eggs Benedict while avoiding everyone's gaze, her youthful face flushed with embarrassment. 3 cousins from the wedding party occupied the far end of the table, their whispered conversations dying abruptly when Thesara appeared. "Good morning, family," Thesara announced, taking her designated seat to Miriam's right with fluid grace. The silence that followed was deafening, charged with unspoken questions and poorly concealed pity. Juniper was the first to break, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thesara, we were wondering if everything was what, dear sister?" Thesara's voice remained perfectly level as she served herself fresh fruit from the crystal bowl. "If my husband and I enjoyed our wedding night, if we're blissfully happy on our first morning as a married couple," the color drained from Juniper's face. Miriam's fork paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes fixed on Thesara with newfound assessment. The cousins exchanged glances that spoke volumes about what they thought they knew. "I'm sure Rafferty had his reasons for leaving so early," Cousin Edmund ventured, his attempt at diplomacy falling flat in the charged atmosphere. Thesara carved her melon with surgical precision, each movement deliberate and controlled. "Indeed, Edmund. I'm certain he had very compelling reasons for his early departure. In fact, when he returns, perhaps you could ask him about those reasons yourself." The implication hung in the air like incense, thick, inescapable, and impossible to ignore. Thesara was not going to pretend, was not going to make excuses, was not going to spare anyone's feelings by covering for her husband's abandonment. Miriam finally spoke, her voice carrying decades of experience with family crises. "Thesara, dear, perhaps you'd like to rest this morning. The wedding was quite exhausting for everyone. Rest." Thesara's laugh was musical and sharp. "How thoughtful of you, Miriam. But I find myself remarkably energized this morning. In fact, I was thinking I might review the household accounts, familiarize myself with the estate management. After all, as the lady of the house, I should understand how everything operates." The statement landed like a gauntlet thrown before medieval knights. Thesara was not retreating to lick her wounds in private. She was advancing, claiming territory, establishing dominance. The household accounts were Miriam's traditional domain, a responsibility she had guarded jealously for 30 years. "The accounts are quite complex," Miriam said carefully. "Perhaps after you've settled in." I have a degree in business administration from Georgetown and managed my family's investments for 5 years before marriage, Thesara replied smoothly. I think I can handle the complexity. Juniper's eyes widened with something approaching admiration, while the cousins looked like they were watching a tennis match they didn't understand. Thesara continued eating with elegant efficiency, allowing her declaration to settle into everyone's consciousness. Of course, Miriam finally conceded, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I'll have the ledgers sent to the study after breakfast. The meal concluded with careful politeness, each family member processing the reality that Thesara would not be the broken, grateful woman they might have expected. As they dispersed to their daily activities, Thesara remained seated, finishing her coffee with the satisfaction of someone who had just won the first battle of a long war. When Juniper lingered behind, clearly wanting to speak privately, Thesara waited with patient attention. Thesara, the younger woman began hesitantly, I want you to know that I think you're handling this with incredible grace. I'm not sure I could be so composed. Thesara reached across the table and took Juniper's hand, her touch warm and genuine. Grace is not the absence of pain, dear sister. It's the refusal to let pain define you. Remember that. As Juniper left with tears in her eyes, Thesara sat alone in the morning sunlight, already planning her next moves. The abandoned bride was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that survival required strategy, that dignity was a choice, and that power taken was more valuable than power given. The clock chimed 9, and Thesara smiled. The day was still young, and she had an empire to claim. Chapter 3. The Heart of the Home. A throne is not always made of gold. Sometimes it is built from the gratitude of those you serve. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding that became a wake, and Thesara had transformed from reluctant bride into the estate's indispensable cornerstone. She moved through the mansion like mercury through glass, fluid, purposeful, and impossible to contain. Every morning began with her review of the household accounts in Rafferty's former study, a room she had claimed with the quiet authority of a conquering general. The ledgers revealed truths that both shocked and energized her. Years of careless spending, overlooked inefficiencies, and outright waste had drained thousands from the family coffers. Thesara's business training kicked into overdrive as she identified cost savings, renegotiated vendor contracts, and streamlined operations with surgical precision. The estate that had been hemorrhaging money for months suddenly began showing profit margins that even impressed the family's longtime accountant. How did you reduce the catering costs by 40% without affecting quality? Miriam asked one afternoon in late July, reviewing Thesara's latest reports with grudging admiration. Thesara looked up from her mahogany desk, where she had spread architectural plans for renovating the East Wing. I discovered we were paying premium prices for standard services because no one had reviewed the contracts in 5 years. A few phone calls and some competitive bidding worked miracles. But Thesara's real power lay not in spreadsheets and profit margins, but in her extraordinary ability to see what others needed before they knew they needed it. When Miriam struggled with the arthritis that made climbing stairs painful, Thesara quietly arranged for a small elevator to be installed, presenting it as a modern convenience rather than medical necessity. When Juniper felt overwhelmed by her graduate studies, Thesara created a study schedule that carved out specific times for both academic work and family obligations. The staff, initially wary of the new mistress, discovered in Thesara a leader who remembered their names, asked about their families, and treated them with the respect that Rafferty had never bothered to show. Maria, the head housekeeper who had worked for the Whitmores for 15 years, found herself confiding problems she had never dared mention to her previous employers. Mrs. Whitmore, Maria said one morning as they planned the weekly menu, my daughter Rosa is having trouble with her college applications. The counselors at her school, they don't understand what she needs. Thesara set down her pen and gave Maria her complete attention. What kind of trouble? She wants to study engineering, but they keep pushing her toward teaching or nursing. They say it's more appropriate for girls like her. Maria's voice carried years of frustration with systems that limited her daughter's dreams. "Bring Rosa to see me this weekend," Thesara said without hesitation. "I have contacts at several engineering programs, and I know exactly how to write applications that get attention for the right reasons." Within a month, Rosa had been accepted to 3 prestigious engineering programs with scholarship offers that would cover her entire education. Maria's gratitude was so profound that she wept openly, but Thesara's satisfaction came from something deeper, the knowledge that she was building a network of loyalty based on genuine care rather than mere authority. The transformation extended to every corner of the estate. Thesara implemented a profit-sharing program for long-term staff, ensuring their dedication was rewarded financially. She created a lending library in the servants' quarters, stocked with books that would help them advance their education. When the groundskeeper's grandson was diagnosed with diabetes, Thesara quietly arranged for the family's health insurance to cover experimental treatments that weren't typically approved. Her days began before sunrise and ended long after sunset. But Thesara had discovered something remarkable. Purpose was its own source of energy. She found herself thriving in ways she had never experienced during her years of social events and charity committees. This was real work, work that mattered, work that changed lives. The transformation was visible in every corner of the estate and beyond. Thesara had quietly begun investing her own trust fund money into local businesses owned by women and minorities, creating a network of enterprises that supported each other through shared resources and collaborative marketing. The bakery owned by Mrs. Rodriguez now supplied pastries for estate events, while the landscaping company run by the Williams brothers maintained the grounds with a level of care that exceeded anything the previous contractors had provided. These business relationships were more than economic transactions. They were building blocks of a community ecosystem that Thesara was creating through strategic investment and genuine partnership. She attended every ribbon cutting, remembered every anniversary, and celebrated every expansion with the enthusiasm of someone who understood that individual success was meaningless without collective prosperity. Her influence extended into the county's educational system as well. The scholarship programs were just the beginning. Thesara had also established mentorship networks, internship opportunities, and college preparation workshops that were transforming the academic trajectory of an entire generation. Teachers began reporting dramatic improvements in student motivation, as young people suddenly saw concrete pathways to futures they had never dared imagine. "You've changed everything," Maria confided one evening as they reviewed the applications for the expanded scholarship program. "My Rosa talks about you like you're some kind of guardian angel. These children have hope now." Rafferty's absence, initially a source of humiliation, had become a blessing in disguise. Without his interference or condescension, Thesara could implement changes that he would have dismissed as unnecessary or inappropriate. The estate flourished under her management in ways it never had under his sporadic attention. "You've accomplished more in a month than Rafferty managed in 5 years," Juniper observed one evening as they reviewed the quarterly budget projections. "Mother is absolutely amazed, though she'll never admit it directly." Thesara smiled as she organized the financial documents with characteristic precision. "Your mother is a remarkable woman who ran this household brilliantly for decades. I'm simply applying business principles to domestic management." "It's more than that," Juniper insisted, her admiration obvious. "You see people, really see them." Rafferty walked through this house for 33 years without learning half the staff's names. The comment hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of truths they both understood but rarely voiced. Rafferty's neglect extended far beyond his wife. It encompassed everyone whose lives he touched but never bothered to understand. As autumn deepened, Thesara's influence expanded beyond the estate walls. She joined the boards of 3 local charities, not for social status, but because she recognized opportunities to create systematic change. Her business acumen transformed struggling organizations into models of efficiency that other cities began to study and emulate. The Whitmore name, previously associated with old money and older prejudices, began appearing in newspapers for innovative community programs and educational initiatives. Thesara's photograph graced the society pages not for attending parties, but for launching scholarship funds and mentorship programs that opened doors for young people who had never dreamed of such opportunities. "Mrs. Whitmore," the local newspaper editor called one afternoon, "would you be willing to give an interview about your community development work?" Thesara considered the request carefully. Public visibility came with risks, but it also provided platforms for advocating for causes she cared about. "I'd be happy to discuss the programs, but the focus should be on the people they serve, not on me personally." The resulting article painted a picture of a woman who embodied the best traditions of civic leadership while challenging the worst traditions of social exclusion. Thesara's quotes emphasized opportunity, education, and the importance of recognizing potential in unexpected places. By early autumn, the estate had become the social center of the county, not for frivolous parties, but for meaningful gatherings that brought together people who might never have met otherwise. Thesara's September harvest celebration included staff families, scholarship recipients, and business partners alongside traditional social contacts. The diversity was intentional and powerful, creating conversations that transcended the usual superficial exchanges. "I've never seen anything like this," a longtime family friend confided to Miriam during the harvest celebration. "Your daughter-in-law has created something extraordinary here." Miriam watched Thesara move through the crowd, equally comfortable discussing investment strategies with bankers and college aspirations with teenagers. "Yes," she agreed quietly, "she has indeed." But Thesara's greatest achievement was not visible in financial reports or newspaper articles. It lay in the transformation of the estate from a house into a home, from a collection of rooms into a community. People sought her guidance not because they had to, but because they trusted her judgment and valued her insights. When young Rosa called to report her acceptance to MIT's engineering program, Thesara felt a satisfaction that no profit margin could provide. When Maria's husband found a better job through contacts Thesara had cultivated, the gratitude in the older woman's eyes was worth more than any social recognition. As autumn settled over the estate, Thesara stood in the study that had become her command center, reviewing not just financial reports but thank-you letters from scholarship recipients, progress updates from community programs, and planning documents for initiatives that would launch in the coming months. The abandoned bride of 4 months ago felt like a character from someone else's story. The grandfather clock chimed midnight as Thesara finally closed the last folder. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to build something meaningful from the wreckage of her wedding night dreams. She had discovered that power was not about controlling others, but about empowering them to control their own destinies. In the distance, she could hear Miriam moving through her nightly routine and Juniper's soft laughter from her phone conversation with friends. The house hummed with the contentment of people who felt secure, valued, and genuinely cared for. Thesara smiled as she turned off the study lights. She had become exactly what she had always been meant to be, not Rafferty's wife, but her own woman, building her own legacy one life at a time. Chapter 4. The First Strike. A shadow may follow you, but it can never lead you. The autumn charity gala at the Rosewood Country Club was the social event of the season, drawing the county's most influential families to support children's education initiatives. Thesara had spent weeks coordinating the fundraising efforts, her reputation for organizational excellence making her the natural choice to lead the committee. She arrived in a stunning midnight blue gown that complemented her radiant skin, her presence commanding immediate attention from the distinguished crowd. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and golden decorations, creating an atmosphere of elegant celebration. Thesara moved through the gathering like a master diplomat, engaging with donors about the scholarship programs she had pioneered, discussing investment opportunities with business leaders, and warmly greeting the teachers and students who would benefit from the evening's fundraising efforts. Mrs. Whitmore, the county superintendent, approached with genuine enthusiasm. "I cannot thank you enough for the tablet program you initiated. Our test scores have improved dramatically since you equipped every classroom with modern technology." Thesara's smile was warm and genuine as she engaged with the educators' excitement. Education is the foundation of everything we hope to achieve as a community. These children represent our future, and investing in their success is the most important work any of us can do. As she spoke, Thesara noticed a subtle shift in the room's energy. Conversations became quieter, glances more pointed, and several people turned toward the entrance with expressions ranging from curiosity to discomfort. She followed their gaze and felt her stomach tighten slightly. Though her exterior remained perfectly composed, Rafferty had arrived, and he was not alone. Her husband of 4 months, whom she had seen perhaps a dozen times since their wedding night, stood in the doorway wearing his usual mask of entitled confidence. But it was his companion who drew the sharp intakes of breath from the assembled crowd. The woman clinging to his arm was everything Thesara was not, pale as winter moonlight, with platinum blonde hair styled in artful waves and a figure displayed in a red dress that left little to imagination. "Who is that with Mr. Whitmore?" whispered Mrs. Patterson, the bank president's wife, her voice carrying the excited maliciousness of someone witnessing a scandal unfold in real time. Thesara maintained her conversation with the superintendent, but her peripheral vision tracked every movement as Rafferty and his companion made their way through the crowd. The woman was younger than Thesara by several years, with the kind of artificial beauty that money could buy and confidence could enhance. More importantly, she carried herself with the brazen entitlement of someone who believed she had won a prize that everyone else had lost. "Excuse me," Thesara said politely to the superintendent. "I should greet my husband and his guest." The path to Rafferty required crossing the entire ballroom, and Thesara used every step to study the dynamics playing out around her. Some guests looked away in embarrassment. Others watched with the hungry anticipation of vultures circling fresh prey. But most interesting were the reactions of the county's power brokers, the judges, business owners, and political figures who had been impressed by Thesara's work over the past months. Their faces showed not excitement about scandal, but disappointment in Rafferty's public disrespect for a woman they had come to admire. The contrast with Rafferty's standing in the community became increasingly stark. Where Thesara received invitations to lead meaningful initiatives, Rafferty found himself excluded from important business discussions and social gatherings. The county's power brokers, who had once courted his favor because of his family's wealth, now viewed him with the kind of polite disdain reserved for disappointing relatives. The transformation was particularly evident at the exclusive Riverside Golf Club, where Rafferty had been a member since childhood. What had once been automatic invitations to important foursome matches with influential business leaders had dried up completely. When he did appear at the club, conversations would shift uncomfortably, and invitations to private dining rooms were notably absent. Meanwhile, Thesara had been invited to join the club's board of directors despite never having played a round of golf in her life. Her strategic mind was valued far more than her athletic abilities. Thesara, Rafferty said when she approached, his voice carrying forced casualness that fooled no one. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I organized the event," she replied smoothly, her tone conversational, but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut silk. "Perhaps if you attended the family dinners, where such things are discussed, you would have been aware of tonight's significance." The blonde woman stepped forward with a smile that dripped calculated malice. "Rafferty has told me so much about you. I'm Cordelia Ashford, and I must say you're exactly as interesting as he described." Thesara studied Cordelia with the clinical precision of a scientist examining a particularly fascinating specimen. The younger woman's jewelry was expensive but flashy, her makeup applied with the heavy hand of someone accustomed to stage lighting rather than elegant society. Most tellingly, her confidence was the brittle kind that required constant reinforcement. She needed to be seen, to be envied, to be acknowledged as victorious. "How delightful to meet you, Miss Ashford," Thesara replied, emphasizing the maiden name with surgical precision. "I hope you're enjoying your first visit to our little community. The charity work we do here might be quite different from what you're accustomed to in—" "Where was it you said you were from?" Cordelia's smile flickered for just a moment before reasserting itself. "I didn't say, actually, but I'm sure wherever it was, it prepared me adequately for this." The challenge hung between them like smoke, visible to everyone within hearing distance. Thesara was aware that at least 20 people had positioned themselves to witness this confrontation, their conversations mere pretense for observing the drama unfold. "I'm certain it did," Thesara agreed with a smile that could have graced the cover of a diplomacy textbook. "After all, preparation is so important for temporary positions." Rafferty shifted uncomfortably, clearly recognizing that his wife was operating several levels above his companion's capabilities. "Thesara, perhaps we could discuss—" "Discuss what, darling?" Thesara interrupted, her voice carrying the sweet poison of perfect politeness. "Your philanthropic interests, your commitment to children's education, your dedication to community service?" Each question landed like a precisely aimed arrow, highlighting everything Rafferty had never cared about and everything she had accomplished in his absence. Cordelia, sensing that the verbal sparring was not going in her favor, decided to escalate with the desperation of someone playing their final card. "Well, at least I know where my man chooses to spend his nights," she announced loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear clearly. The silence that followed was deafening. Gasps echoed from nearby guests, and several older ladies looked genuinely shocked at such brazen disrespect being displayed publicly. Rafferty's face flushed red with a combination of embarrassment and anger, though whether directed at Cordelia's lack of discretion or Thesara's composed response remained unclear. Thesara absorbed the insult with the grace of someone who had been expecting exactly this moment for months. She had prepared for this confrontation, had rehearsed her response until it became as natural as breathing. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had never doubted her own worth. "My dear," she said, her tone conveying the kind of patient condescension usually reserved for explaining complex concepts to small children. "You seem to have confused temporary entertainment with permanent value." Rafferty chose a shadow to dance with in his darkness. "I chose to be the light that illuminates everything around me." The words fell into the silence like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread throughout the ballroom. Thesara's voice had carried clearly enough for everyone to hear, and her metaphor was both elegant and devastating. She had not denied Cordelia's claim or made excuses for Rafferty's behavior. Instead, she had reframed the entire situation, positioning herself not as the victim of infidelity, but as the source of illumination in a world of shadows. "When you dance with shadows," Thesara continued, her gaze steady on Cordelia's increasingly pale face, "you must remember that shadows disappear the moment someone turns on the lights. Light, however, is eternal." The applause started slowly, with Judge Morrison, a man whose respect was worth more than gold in their community, bringing his hands together in deliberate appreciation. It spread through the crowd like wildfire, building from polite acknowledgement to genuine admiration. For a woman who had faced public humiliation with such dignity and intelligence, Cordelia's confident smile crumbled entirely as she realized that her moment of supposed triumph had become her complete defeat. She had expected tears, anger, or desperate pleading. Instead, she had encountered a woman who operated on an entirely different level of sophistication and self-possession. We should go," Cordelia stammered to Rafferty. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated, but Rafferty stood frozen, staring at his wife with an expression that mingled shock, admiration, and something that might have been the first stirrings of genuine regret. He had expected to witness Thesara's humiliation, perhaps even her public breakdown. Instead, he had watched her elevate herself beyond his reach, while simultaneously diminishing both him and his mistress to the status of amusing distractions. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," Thesara said graciously, her words directed to the crowd rather than to the couple before her. "We have important work to continue here, futures to build, dreams to nurture, and lights to kindle in places that have been dark for far too long." As Rafferty and Cordelia made their awkward exit, followed by whispers and pointed stares, Thesara resumed her conversations with the ease of someone who had just handled a minor interruption rather than a life-altering confrontation. But those who watched her carefully noticed the subtle signs of her triumph, the straightening of her shoulders, the brightening of her smile, the way she seemed to glow with an inner radiance that made everyone around her feel more alive. "Magnificent," Judge Morrison murmured to his wife as they watched Thesara engage warmly with a group of scholarship recipients. "Absolutely magnificent." By the end of the evening, the charity gala had raised record amounts for educational programs. But the real victory belonged to Thesara. She had faced her husband's public betrayal and emerged not just unscathed, but enhanced. Word of her elegant response spread through the community faster than gossip, transforming her from the object of pity into a symbol of strength and grace under pressure. As the evening wound down and guests began their farewells, Thesara found herself approached by 3 different news outlets requesting interviews about her community development work. The local television station wanted a feature story about her innovative approaches to economic growth, while the regional business magazine sought her insights on sustainable development models that other counties might adopt. "Mrs. Whitmore," said Rebecca Chen, the investigative journalist from Channel 7 News, "your work has caught the attention of state officials who are considering your programs as models for statewide implementation. Would you be available for an extended interview about your methodologies?" Thesara accepted graciously, understanding that media attention would amplify her ability to influence positive change beyond county boundaries. As she exchanged contact information with the journalists, she noticed Rafferty standing alone beside his car in the parking lot, no longer approached by anyone seeking his opinions or insights. As she drove home alone that night, Thesara allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The abandoned bride was truly gone now, replaced by a woman who understood that real power came not from avoiding battles, but from choosing when and how to fight them. Tonight, she had chosen perfectly. Chapter 5. The Community's Choice. Respect is not inherited. It is earned through actions and confirmed by others. Word of the charity gala confrontation spread through the county's social circles like wildfire, but not in the way Rafferty had anticipated. Instead of whispered gossip about his wife's humiliation, the conversations focused on Thesara's extraordinary grace under pressure and her devastating verbal victory over his mistress. Within days, the incident had been transformed from scandal into legend, with Thesara emerging as a figure of almost mythical dignity. The first sign of the community's choice came 3 days after the gala, when Judge Morrison's wife Catherine called to invite Thesara to join the board of the Cultural Arts Foundation. "We need someone with your combination of business acumen and social conscience," Catherine explained, her admiration evident. "What you've accomplished with the scholarship programs demonstrates exactly the kind of vision we're looking for." That same week, Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, the county's most respected physician, asked Thesara to chair the new medical outreach initiative. "Your organizational skills are legendary," Dr. Hayes said during their lunch meeting at the country club. "But more importantly, you understand how to build bridges between different communities. That's exactly what we need for this program to succeed." Thesara accepted both positions with characteristic grace, already formulating plans to transform these organizations from social clubs into engines of genuine change. Her reputation for turning good intentions into measurable results had made her the most sought-after board member in the county. "It's remarkable how quickly things can change," observed Robert Chen, the bank president, during a meeting about commercial development projects. 6 months ago, Rafferty Whitmore's opinion carried significant weight in this community. Now, when people want real leadership, they call his wife. The transformation was most evident at the monthly Community Leaders Council meeting, where the county's most influential citizens gathered to discuss local issues. Thesara had been invited to join based on her proven track record of successful program implementation. When she arrived for her first meeting, every person in the room stood to greet her, a sign of respect that spoke volumes about her rapidly ascending status. "Mrs. Whitmore," Mayor Richardson said warmly, "your education initiatives have become the model that other counties are trying to replicate. We're honored to have your insights as we plan our next phase of community development." Thesara took her seat at the polished conference table, immediately feeling the atmosphere of serious purpose that characterized this group. These were people who made decisions that affected thousands of lives, and they had welcomed her based purely on her demonstrated competence and vision. The meeting had been in progress for 20 minutes when Rafferty arrived, clearly expecting his traditional place at the table, despite his months of absence from community affairs. The silence that greeted his entrance was not hostile, but it was telling. No one stood, no one rushed to make space, and the warm welcomes that had characterized Thesara's arrival were notably absent. "Rafferty," Mayor Richardson acknowledged with perfunctory politeness, "how nice to see you. I believe there might be a chair available at the back." The seating arrangement spoke louder than any formal declaration could have. Thesara sat among the decision-makers. Her voice actively sought in discussions about budget allocations and program priorities. Rafferty occupied a folding chair near the wall, clearly positioned as an observer rather than a participant. "Mrs. Whitmore," the school superintendent addressed her directly, "your technology initiative has revolutionized our test scores. What would you recommend for expanding the program to include vocational training?" Thesara's response was both comprehensive and practical, outlining implementation strategies, funding sources, and measurable success metrics. Her presentation commanded the room's complete attention, with several council members taking detailed notes and asking follow-up questions that demonstrated their serious consideration of her proposals. Throughout the discussion, Rafferty remained silent, his discomfort increasingly obvious as he witnessed his wife's complete integration into the community's leadership structure. The contrast was unavoidable, where Thesara offered detailed solutions and actionable plans. Rafferty had historically provided only vague generalities and empty promises. After the meeting, the real dynamics became even clearer. Council members lingered to continue conversations with Thesara, seeking her input on projects and inviting her to additional committees. Judge Morrison asked her to consider joining the Judicial Review Board, while Dr. Hayes wanted her perspective on the new Medical Center Planning Committee. "Your husband seems to have missed quite a few meetings," Catherine Morrison commented quietly as the group began to disperse. Thesara's response was diplomatically perfect. "Rafferty has been quite busy with personal matters. I'm sure he appreciates the community's patience with his shifting priorities." The phrase "personal matters" carried just enough implication to remind everyone of the gala incident without requiring explicit discussion. Thesara had mastered the art of saying everything while saying nothing, allowing others to draw their own conclusions while maintaining her position above petty gossip. As they walked to their cars, Rafferty attempted to approach his wife, clearly intending some form of conversation about the evening's dynamics. But Dr. Hayes intercepted him with the kind of protective instinct that successful women recognized in each other. "Mrs. Whitmore," Dr. Hayes called, "would you have time for coffee tomorrow? I'd love to discuss your thoughts on the maternal health initiative." Thesara accepted graciously, allowing Dr. Hayes to escort her to her car, while Rafferty stood awkwardly beside his BMW, clearly dismissed from the adult conversation. The symbolism was unmistakable. The community's leadership had chosen their preferred representative of the Whitmore family, and it was not the man whose name was on the estate deed. The pattern repeated itself across every significant social and business gathering over the following weeks. At the Hospital Foundation dinner, Thesara was seated at the head table with major donors and board chairs, while Rafferty found himself relegated to a standard table near the kitchen doors. At the business development luncheon, entrepreneurs and investors sought Thesara's advice on projects and partnerships, treating her as a serious financial mind rather than merely a wealthy man's wife. Mrs. Whitmore approached Janet Walsh, who owned the county's largest manufacturing company. "I've been following your community investment strategies. Would you consider consulting on our expansion plans? Your track record with sustainable growth is exactly what we need." These requests for Thesara's professional expertise represented a fundamental shift in how the community viewed her role. She was no longer seen as an accessory to her husband's status, but as an independent force whose opinions and participation were valued for their own merit. The most telling moment came during the annual Chamber of Commerce Awards dinner, when Thesara was honored with the Community Leadership Award, an accolade typically reserved for business owners and elected officials who had demonstrated exceptional service over many years. As she stood at the podium accepting the crystal trophy, Thesara could see Rafferty sitting alone at a table toward the back, his isolation complete and public. "This award belongs not to me alone, but to every person who has worked to build bridges where others saw walls," Thesara said in her acceptance speech. "True leadership is not about commanding others, but about empowering them to achieve their highest potential. When we lift others up, we all rise together." The standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes, with every person in the room recognizing that they were witnessing the emergence of a leader whose influence would extend far beyond county boundaries. Local newspaper photographers captured image after image of Thesara, surrounded by admirers, while Rafferty sat unnoticed and unacknowledged in the background. The message was clear, decisive, and irreversible. The community had made its choice. When they needed leadership, they turned to Thesara. When they wanted innovation, they sought her counsel. When they planned for the future, they included her vision. Rafferty's social exile was complete, but it was not the result of vindictive plotting or deliberate cruelty. It was simply the natural consequence of his own choices, contrasted with his wife's consistent excellence. The community had evaluated both Whitmores based on their actions and contributions, and their decision was unanimous. Standing in the parking lot, accepting final congratulations from departing guests, Thesara caught sight of Rafferty walking alone to his car. For just a moment, she felt a flicker of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly, replaced by the satisfaction of someone who had earned every accolade through merit rather than inheritance. The abandoned bride was not just gone. She had been replaced by a queen who had won her crown through service, intelligence, and unwavering dignity. The community's choice was also her victory. Chapter 6. The Business of Respect. In the marketplace of ideas, authenticity is the only currency that never devalues. December brought the kind of crisp winter air that made every breath visible and every decision feel sharper, more consequential. The Whitmore estate had become an unofficial headquarters for several of the county's most ambitious business ventures, with entrepreneurs and investors scheduling regular meetings in Thesara's study to benefit from her strategic insights and growing network of influential contacts. On a particularly bright Tuesday morning, Thesara was reviewing quarterly projections for the scholarship fund when her assistant announced that representatives from Blackstone Industries had arrived for their scheduled appointment. The company was considering a major manufacturing expansion that would bring hundreds of jobs to the county, and they had specifically requested Thesara's input on community integration strategies. "Mrs. Whitmore," announced David Blackstone as he entered the study with two associates, "your reputation for bridging business success with community development has reached our corporate headquarters in Chicago. We need exactly that kind of vision for our expansion plans." Thesara welcomed the delegation with the professional warmth that had become her trademark, immediately establishing an atmosphere of serious business discussion rather than social pleasantries. Her study, once Rafferty's domain, had been transformed into a space that commanded respect, polished mahogany surfaces displaying awards for community service alongside sophisticated financial analyses, walls lined with books on economics and social policy rather than hunting trophies. "I appreciate your confidence in our community," Thesara replied, gesturing for the men to take seats around the conference table she had installed for exactly these kinds of strategic discussions. "What specific aspects of local integration are you hoping to address?" For the next hour, Thesara demonstrated the analytical skills that had made her indispensable to the county's business community. She outlined workforce development strategies, identified potential community partnerships, and proposed innovative approaches to environmental stewardship that would enhance rather than compromise the region's natural resources. "Your preliminary workforce analysis is exceptional," admitted Robert Chen, Blackstone's chief financial officer, reviewing the documents Thesara had prepared. "These projection models account for variables that our own consultants missed completely." The meeting was reaching its conclusion when an awkward commotion in the foyer announced an unexpected arrival. Thesara heard Cordelia's voice, too loud, too demanding, insisting that she had every right to enter the house. The business delegation exchanged glances of polite confusion as the disturbance grew more pronounced. "Perhaps we should reschedule," suggested David Blackstone, clearly uncomfortable with the unprofessional atmosphere that had suddenly invaded their serious discussion. "Absolutely not," Thesara replied firmly, pressing the intercom button to summon her assistant. "Maria, please show our guests to the library for coffee while I address this interruption. Gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption and will rejoin you shortly." But before Maria could respond, Cordelia burst through the study doors with the dramatic flair of someone accustomed to creating scenes for attention. She was dressed inappropriately for a business setting, wearing a tight red dress better suited to nightclub appearances, and her demeanor carried the brittle confidence of someone who had been drinking despite the early hour. "Well, well," Cordelia announced loudly, taking in the professional setting with obvious disdain. "Playing businesswoman now, are we? How adorable." The Blackstone delegation watched with fascination as this unexpected drama unfolded, clearly trying to understand the relationship between the elegant professional woman they had been negotiating with, and this theatrical intruder who seemed to embody everything inappropriate about mixing personal matters with business affairs. Thessara's response was a masterclass in professional crisis management. Rather than engaging with Cordelia's obvious attempt to create embarrassment, she addressed her unexpected guest with the same polite formality she would use with any unwelcome interruption. "Miss Ashford," she said calmly, "I'm currently in a business meeting. If you need to discuss something with my husband, I believe you'll find him at his downtown office." She turned to the delegation with seamless composure. "Gentlemen, shall we continue our discussion in the library as suggested?" Oh, but Cordelia had not come to be dismissed so easily. She stepped further into the room, apparently believing that her connection to Rafferty gave her some authority in his wife's professional space. "These must be Rafferty's business associates," she declared, extending her hand toward David Blackstone with practiced seduction. "I'm Cordelia, and I'm much more accessible than the lady of the house." The silence that followed was deafening. David Blackstone made no move to accept Cordelia's offered handshake, while his associates exchanged looks of profound discomfort. Professional men accustomed to serious business negotiations had no framework for processing such inappropriate behavior. "Actually," David Blackstone replied with ice-cold politeness, "we're here specifically to work with Mrs. Whitmore. Her expertise in community development strategy is why Blackstone Industries requested this meeting." Cordelia's confident smile faltered as she realized that these important business figures had no interest in her charms and considered her presence an unwelcome interruption. Her attempt to position herself as the more appealing alternative had backfired spectacularly, making her appear unprofessional and inappropriate rather than attractive. "I'm sure Thessara means well," Cordelia continued desperately, "but if you want to understand this community, you really should talk to people who've been here longer and understand how things actually work." Robert, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke with the kind of authority that ended discussions rather than beginning them. "Mrs. Whitmore has been instrumental in every successful business development initiative in this county over the past year. Her community integration strategies have become the gold standard that other regions are attempting to replicate. I'm not sure what qualifications you're offering, but they would need to be quite extraordinary to exceed her demonstrated track record." The words landed like a judicial verdict, final and unappealable. Cordelia found herself facing three successful businessmen who viewed her not as an attractive distraction from their serious work, but as an impediment to important negotiations with a woman they genuinely respected and needed. Thessara allowed the silence to extend just long enough for everyone to absorb the complete reversal of Cordelia's intended effect. Then she moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to managing complex situations. "Maria," she called, and the housekeeper appeared immediately, clearly having been waiting nearby in case assistance was needed. "Please escort Miss Ashford to the front door and ensure she understands that future visits should be scheduled through my husband's office." As Maria gently but firmly guided the deflated Cordelia toward the exit, Thessara turned back to the business delegation with the kind of seamless professionalism that transforms awkward incidents into evidence of competent leadership. "Gentlemen, I apologize for that interruption. Shall we review the environmental impact assessments in the library? I believe you'll find the sustainability projections particularly interesting." But David Blackstone remained seated, studying Thessara with undisguised admiration. "Mrs. Whitmore, that was an impressive demonstration of crisis management under pressure. How you handled that situation tells us everything we need to know about your leadership capabilities." "In business," Thessara replied evenly, "unexpected challenges are simply opportunities to demonstrate consistent principles. The same skills that manage community relationships can handle corporate disruptions." The remainder of the meeting proceeded with enhanced respect from the Blackstone delegation, who had witnessed firsthand Thesara's ability to maintain professional standards regardless of personal provocations. By the time they concluded their discussions, the preliminary contracts included provisions for community development initiatives that exceeded anything Blackstone Industries had previously offered in their expansion projects. "Mrs. Whitmore," David Blackstone said as they prepared to leave, "I want to be completely clear about something. We came here expecting to negotiate with both you and your husband about this expansion. After today's meeting, I can tell you definitively that Blackstone Industries considers you our primary point of contact for all community relations. Your husband's involvement will not be necessary." The statement represented more than a business decision. It was a public declaration that Thesara's professional reputation had surpassed her husband's to such a degree that major corporations preferred to work exclusively with her. The abandoned bride had been replaced by a business leader whose expertise was actively sought by companies planning multi-million-dollar investments. As the delegation departed, Thesara returned to her study and found a message from Rafferty's downtown office. He had heard about Cordelia's disastrous appearance at the business meeting and wanted to apologize for the embarrassment she had caused. The message itself was revealing. Rafferty now understood that his personal choices had professional consequences, and that those consequences were affecting his wife's rising career. But Thesara's response was swift and decisive. She dictated a brief reply stating that she was too busy with important business matters to discuss personal issues, and suggested that he address any concerns about his companion's behavior directly with her. The message was clear. Thesara had moved beyond the realm where personal drama could affect her professional advancement. She had built a reputation based on competence and integrity that was strong enough to withstand any scandal Rafferty and Cordelia might create. That evening, as she reviewed the Blackstone contracts and prepared for the next day's community development meetings, Thesara reflected on the day's events with quiet satisfaction. The woman who had waited alone on her wedding night would never have imagined that business leaders would seek her counsel over her husband's, or that her professional reputation could eclipse his family name. But the transformation was complete and irreversible. Thesara had become exactly what the business community needed, a leader whose vision extended beyond profit margins to encompass genuine community benefit, whose integrity could be trusted in complex negotiations, and whose competence could deliver results that exceeded expectations. The business of respect, she had learned, was the most profitable venture of all. Chapter 7. The Unraveling. True strength is revealed not in moments of triumph, but in how we respond to desperate attempts at manipulation. January brought the kind of penetrating cold that seemed to seep into bones and hearts alike. And with it came Rafferty's first serious attempt to reclaim some connection with the wife, whose success had made his failures impossible to ignore. The county's social media was filled with photographs from the New Year's Business Leadership Gala, where Thesara had been honored as Entrepreneur of the Year for her community development initiatives, an award that should have gone to a Whitmore, but had bypassed him entirely. Thesara was in her study reviewing applications for the Spring Scholarship Program when Maria announced that Rafferty was waiting in the front parlor, requesting a private conversation. It was the first time in months that he had asked to see her formally, rather than simply appearing unexpectedly with Cordelia in tow. "Tell him I'll join him in 10 minutes, Thesara replied, not looking up from the scholarship essays that had absorbed her attention. These applications represented young lives seeking transformation through education, and their importance far exceeded any awkward conversation with her estranged husband. When she finally entered the parlor, Thesara found Rafferty pacing nervously beside the marble fireplace, his usual confident demeanor replaced by something approaching humility. He was impeccably dressed as always, but there was a hollowness to his appearance that suggested sleepless nights and unaccustomed anxiety. "The Sarah," he began, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of uncertainty. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." She settled into the wingback chair that had become her customary seat for difficult conversations, maintaining the perfect posture that conveyed both attention and emotional distance. "What can I do for you, Rafferty?" "I've been thinking about us, about our marriage, about the mistakes I've made." He paused, clearly struggling with words that felt foreign in his mouth. "I want to apologize for my behavior since our wedding. I want to try to make things right between us." The Sarah studied her husband with the clinical interest of a researcher observing a fascinating specimen. His attempt at contrition was performed rather than felt, the words carefully chosen but lacking genuine emotion. More importantly, his apology focused on abstract mistakes rather than acknowledging specific harm he had caused. "What mistakes would those be, specifically?" she asked, her voice maintaining the neutral tone she had perfected for difficult negotiations. Rafferty's discomfort increased visibly as he realized that vague generalities would not satisfy his wife's logical mind. "Well, I should have been more attentive, more present in our marriage. I should have prioritized our relationship over other commitments." The euphemism "other commitments" to describe his months-long affair with Cordelia was so inadequate that it bordered on insulting. The Sarah felt a flicker of something that might have been amusement at his inability to name his actual transgressions. "I see," she replied evenly. "And what has prompted this sudden interest in our marriage? Has something changed in your other commitments?" Rafferty's face flushed with embarrassment at her precise verbal thrust. He had come hoping for easy forgiveness, perhaps even gratitude, for his willingness to work on their relationship. Instead, he encountered a woman who demanded accountability with surgical precision. "It's not about other people," he protested weakly. "It's about us. About what I owe you as your husband. What you owe me as my husband," the Sarah repeated thoughtfully, as if testing the concept for logical consistency. "That's an interesting phrase, Rafferty. What exactly do you believe you owe me?" The question hung in the air between them, like a challenge that Rafferty was manifestly unprepared to meet. He had approached this conversation expecting to deliver a brief apology and receive grateful acceptance, thereby solving his growing social isolation problem with minimal effort on his part. "I owe you respect, fidelity, partnership." The words sounded hollow even as he spoke them, like someone reciting definitions without understanding their meaning. The Sarah leaned back in her chair, her dark eyes never leaving his face. "Respect is not owed, Rafferty. It is earned through consistent actions over time. Fidelity is not a debt to be paid, but a choice to be made daily. Partnership requires mutual investment in shared goals and values." Each statement landed with the weight of someone who had spent months analyzing exactly what had been missing from their marriage. The Sarah was not speaking from hurt feelings or romantic disappointment, but from the clear-eyed assessment of someone who had moved far beyond the need for his validation. "You speak as if," Rafferty began, then stopped, clearly struggling with the reality that his wife was evaluating their relationship like a business proposition rather than responding emotionally to his overtures. "As if what?" The Sarah prompted with the patience of someone willing to wait for honesty. "As if you don't need this marriage anymore. As if you don't need me." The admission hung between them with startling clarity. Rafferty had finally articulated the fear that had driven him to attempt this reconciliation. Not love or genuine remorse, but the dawning realization that his wife had become completely independent of him. The Sarah considered his words carefully before responding. "It is an interesting concept, Rafferty. For 7 months, I have managed the estate, built community relationships, developed successful business ventures, and created meaningful programs that benefit hundreds of people. What specific need would you fulfill in my life?" The question was not cruel, but it was devastating in its straightforward logic. Rafferty found himself confronting the reality that his wife had not only survived his abandonment, but had thrived in ways that made his contribution superfluous. "I'm your husband," he said desperately, as if the legal title itself constituted an argument. "You are my husband in name," Thesara agreed. "But marriage is not a title, it is a relationship. Relationships require mutual respect, shared values, and consistent investment from both parties. When did you last invest in our relationship, Rafferty?" He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, as he realized that any honest answer would only reinforce her point. His investment had consisted entirely of taking her presence for granted while pursuing his own interests elsewhere. "I want to change," he said finally, the words carrying the desperation of someone who had run out of better options. "I want to be worthy of your respect." Thesara stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the winter landscape while she formulated her response. When she turned back to face him, her expression carried the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. "Respect is not begged for, Rafferty. It is earned through actions, demonstrated through consistency, and proven through sacrifice. You cannot simply declare your intention to change and expect immediate absolution." "Then what would it take?" he asked, his voice carrying the plaintive note of someone who finally understood the magnitude of his losses. "That is not my question to answer," Thesara replied with calm authority. "You must decide what kind of man you want to be, what kind of marriage you want to build, and what sacrifices you are willing to make for principles beyond your own convenience. When you have answered those questions with your actions rather than your words, then we might have something to discuss." "Partnership requires mutual contribution, Rafferty. What would you contribute to my life that is not already abundantly provided by my work, my community relationships, and my own capabilities?" The question was not rhetorical. It demanded a practical answer based on genuine value rather than sentimental appeal. Rafferty found himself confronting the reality that his wife had built a complete, successful, and fulfilling life that had no obvious place for him. He shifted uncomfortably, realizing that every answer he might give would only highlight his irrelevance. I could help with your business ventures. I have connections, resources." "I have better connections and more resources," Thesara interrupted gently. "I also have the competence to use them effectively, which has been demonstrated through measurable results over more than a year." "Then what about companionship? Emotional support?" "I receive more genuine companionship and emotional support from my work colleagues and community partners than I ever received from our marriage. They respect my opinions, value my contributions, and celebrate my successes without reservation." Rafferty's face grew increasingly desperate as each suggestion met the same fate, practical refutation based on her demonstrated independence. He had entered this conversation believing that his return to the marriage would be welcomed, even if grudgingly. Instead, he was discovering that he had become completely superfluous to a woman who had learned to thrive in his absence. "What about love?" he asked desperately, playing his final card. "What about the commitment we made to each other?" Thesara's expression softened almost imperceptibly, but her words carried no warmth. "Love requires respect, trust, and mutual investment, Rafferty. Commitment means choosing your partner's well-being over your own convenience, day after day, year after year. You demonstrated that you understand neither concept." The response was devastating in its quiet logic. Rafferty was forced to confront the reality that he had never truly loved his wife. He had simply expected her to remain available while he pursued his own interests. The woman sitting before him had evolved far beyond the need for his validation or presence. Rafferty stared at his wife with growing comprehension that this conversation had not gone according to any scenario he had imagined. He had expected either angry confrontation or tearful reconciliation, either of which would have confirmed his importance in her emotional life. Instead, he had encountered someone who evaluated him with the same dispassionate criteria she applied to business proposals. "Thesara, please. I know I've made mistakes, but surely our marriage is worth fighting for." "Our marriage," she repeated quietly, "died on our wedding night, Rafferty. What exists now is a legal arrangement and a business partnership managing shared assets. If you want something more than that, you must first prove that you understand the difference between a husband and a roommate." The words carried no anger, no bitterness, just the clear-eyed assessment of someone who had moved beyond romantic illusions to practical reality. Thesara had not spent 7 months waiting for her husband to return. She had spent them building a life that made his return irrelevant. As Rafferty left the parlor, his shoulders sagging with the weight of complete defeat, Thesara returned to her scholarship applications. Young minds seeking opportunity through education represented the future she was building, a future that had no place for people who confused words with actions or promises with results. The abandoned bride was not just gone. She had been replaced by a woman who measured worth through contribution rather than sentiment, who demanded substance rather than accepting style, and who had learned that the most important relationship in her life was the one she had with herself. Rafferty's attempt at reconciliation had failed, not because Thesara was unforgiving, but because forgiveness required genuine repentance, and repentance required understanding the gravity of what had been lost. He remained a stranger to both concepts. Chapter 8. The Celebration of Truth. Honor is not determined by the volume of applause, but by the consistency of principle that earns it. March arrived with the kind of soft warmth that promised spring's eventual triumph over winter's grip, and with it came the annual Whitmore family reunion, a tradition that had endured for nearly a century. The estate's grand ballroom, which had not hosted a major family gathering since Thesara's wedding reception, was transformed into an elegant celebration space that showcased both historical grandeur and contemporary sophistication. Thesara had spent weeks orchestrating every detail of the event, from the catering that highlighted both traditional family recipes and innovative culinary presentations to the entertainment that would appeal to family members ranging from elderly great-aunts to energetic teenage cousins. Her organizational skills, honed through months of community leadership, ensured that the reunion would be both memorable and meaningful. "Thesara, dear," announced Miriam as she surveyed the ballroom's preparation on the morning of the event, "you've outdone yourself. This looks absolutely magnificent." The decorations struck the perfect balance between elegance and warmth, with fresh flowers from the estate's gardens complementing professional lighting that highlighted the room's architectural features. Tables were arranged to encourage conversation between different generations and family branches, while display boards showcased family history alongside recent achievements by various family members. By early evening, the ballroom buzzed with the animated conversations of 43 family members who had traveled from across the country to attend the reunion. Thesara moved through the gathering like a master conductor leading a complex symphony, ensuring that elderly relatives had comfortable seating, teenagers found engaging activities, and the various family factions maintained harmonious interactions. The evening held special significance for Thesara, as it represented the first major family gathering since her transformation from abandoned bride to acknowledged matriarch. She had spent months building relationships with relatives through thoughtful correspondence, remembering birthdays and anniversaries, and offering practical support during family crises. Tonight would reveal whether these efforts had created genuine bonds or merely polite obligations. Aunt Thesara called 16-year-old Marcus, Rafferty's cousin's son. "My mom says you're the one who helped me get into that summer engineering program. Is that true?" Thesara smiled warmly at the young man, who whose academic potential had impressed her during his scholarship application review. "You earned that opportunity through your own excellent work, Marcus. I simply made sure the right people knew about your talents." The exchange was overheard by several relatives who had not fully understood the extent of Thessara's community involvement. Uncle Harold, a retired professor who had always prided himself on the family's intellectual achievements, approached with obvious curiosity. "Thessara," he said with genuine interest, "I've been hearing remarkable things about your educational initiatives. Harold Jr. tells me you've revolutionized the scholarship programs in this entire county." Before Thessara could respond, Cousin Patricia joined the conversation with obvious excitement. "You should see the article about her in Regional Business magazine. They called her the most innovative community development leader in the state. I've been bragging about her to everyone I know." The praise felt different from the polite acknowledgments she had grown accustomed to receiving. These were family members who had known her before her marriage, people who had watched her grow from ambitious college student to accomplished professional. Their recognition carried weight that transcended social politeness to encompass genuine family pride. "I had no idea you were involved in so many important projects," admitted Cousin Rebecca, whose own career as a federal prosecutor had always made her somewhat intimidating to other family members. "The legal aid clinic you established is being studied by 3 other states as a model for rural justice initiatives." As the evening progressed, similar conversations erupted throughout the ballroom. Family members who had known Thessara primarily as Rafferty's wife discovered that she had become a significant figure in her own right, someone whose achievements reflected credit on the entire family name. The contrast with previous family gatherings was striking. Where Thessara had once been introduced as an appendage to her husband's identity, she now stood at the center of discussions about innovation, leadership, and positive change. Relatives sought her opinions on everything from investment strategies to educational policy, recognizing that her success was based on substance rather than social position. "Where is Rafferty this evening?" asked Great-Aunt Eleanor, whose sharp eyes missed nothing and whose questions always probed beneath surface politeness. Thessara's response was diplomatically perfect. "Rafferty had prior commitments this evening, but he sends his regrets and his best wishes for a wonderful reunion." The euphemism "prior commitments" was understood by everyone present to mean that Rafferty was with Cordelia, but Thessara's gracious phrasing allowed the family to maintain their dignity while acknowledging the situation's reality. No one pressed for details, but several relatives exchanged meaningful glances that spoke volumes about their assessment of Rafferty's priorities. Uncle Harold's wife, Margaret, pulled Thessara aside during dessert with the kind of serious expression that preceded important family conversations. "My dear," she said quietly, "I want you to know that your handling of difficult circumstances has been absolutely exemplary. The entire family admires your dignity and your strength." The comment opened floodgates of similar expressions from relatives who had been following the situation with varying degrees of concern and admiration. Cousin James, a successful attorney from Boston, commended Thessara's business acumen, and Ruth, a retired teacher, praised her educational initiatives. Even the younger cousins expressed appreciation for her mentorship and support of their academic and career goals. The evening's formal program included presentations about family history, recognition of recent graduations and achievements, and announcements about upcoming weddings and births. But the unscripted moments revealed the most about how family dynamics had shifted over the past months. When Cousin David's son announced his acceptance to medical school, he specifically thanked Aunt Thessara for her guidance during the application process. When teenage Emily shared her plans to study environmental science, she credited Thessara's mentorship program for showing her that such dreams were achievable. These acknowledgments came spontaneously without prompting from young people who had found in Thessara the kind of supportive adult figure that every family needs. "I think it's important that we recognize what Thesara has accomplished," announced Miriam during the traditional toast that concluded family dinners. "She has not only maintained the honor of our family name, but has enhanced it through her exceptional service to our community." The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, with family members standing to show their respect for someone who had exceeded every expectation. Thesara found herself surrounded by relatives offering specific examples of how her work had touched their lives or the lives of people they knew. "My business partner's daughter received one of your scholarships," said Cousin Robert, who owned several restaurants in Philadelphia. "That girl is the first person in her family to attend college, and she credits you with making her dreams possible." The stories multiplied throughout the evening, creating a portrait of someone whose influence extended far beyond family boundaries to encompass genuine community transformation. Family members who had traveled hundreds of miles discovered that they were related to a woman whose reputation for excellence had preceded their arrival. The absence of Rafferty became increasingly pronounced as the evening progressed, but not in the way that absences typically affect family gatherings. Rather than leaving a void that everyone felt obligated to fill with excuses or explanations, his absence felt irrelevant to the celebration of family connection and shared pride. The reunion was complete without him because Thesara had become the family's primary representative to the world. "Rafferty doesn't know what he's given up," observed Uncle Harold's son during a private conversation with his wife. "Thesara has become the kind of woman that men spend their entire lives hoping to find, and he's too foolish to appreciate what he has." As the formal program concluded and family members began sharing more intimate conversations over coffee and brandy, Thesara found herself at the center of discussions about everything from investment strategies to educational policy to community leadership principles. Her relatives sought her opinions with the respect typically reserved for acknowledged experts, recognizing that her success was based on substance rather than social position. "Thesara," said Great-Aunt Eleanor as the evening wound down, "I want to tell you something that I've never said to any of my nieces or great-nieces. You have become exactly the kind of woman this family needs to represent us in the next generation. Your strength, your intelligence, and your character reflect the very best of our heritage." The comment was particularly meaningful, coming from Eleanor, whose standards for family behavior were legendarily exacting. Her approval carried weight that extended far beyond personal opinion to encompass family legacy and reputation. As guests began their farewells, Thesara received invitation after invitation to visit relatives, participate in family business ventures, and serve as godmother or mentor to younger family members. The abandoned bride of 9 months ago had been replaced by the family matriarch of the next generation. "Promise me you'll come to San Francisco this summer," insisted Cousin Patricia as she prepared to leave. "My daughters need to meet someone who shows them what's possible when you combine intelligence with determination." Standing in the ballroom as the last guests departed, surrounded by the remnants of an evening that had celebrated not just family history but family future, Thesara felt the satisfaction of someone who had earned every accolade through merit rather than inheritance. The family that had welcomed her as Rafferty's wife now claimed her as their own, independent of his presence or approval. Miriam approached as Thesara began supervising the cleanup, her expression carrying decades of family wisdom and genuine affection. "My dear," she said quietly, "tonight has shown everyone what I realized months ago. You are not just part of this family, you are the heart of it." The reunion had accomplished something beyond family bonding or social celebration. It had publicly established Thesara's position as the family's representative to the world, the person whose achievements reflected their values and whose character embodied their aspirations. Rafferty's absence had not been ignored or excused, it had been irrelevant. The family had gathered to celebrate their connection to someone whose presence enriched their lives and whose accomplishments enhanced their reputation. His choice to be elsewhere said everything about his priorities and nothing about their loss. As the grandfather clock chimed midnight, marking the end of an evening that would be remembered for years to come, the Tsara reflected on the journey from abandoned bride to family matriarch. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and built on foundations strong enough to support generations of future family pride. Chapter 2. Undine, the Wall of Steel. Desperation is the shadow that follows those who mistake persistence for principle. April brought unseasonably warm weather that seemed to mock the chill that had settled permanently between Tsara and Rafferty, and with it came his increasingly desperate attempts to penetrate the wall of polite indifference she had constructed around their interactions. The family reunion had made devastatingly clear how completely his position in both family and community had eroded, while his wife's influence continued to expand with each passing week. The Tsara was in her study reviewing applications for the summer internship program when Maria announced that Rafferty was requesting another private conversation. It was his third attempt in 2 weeks, each one more awkward than the last, as he struggled to find some approach that might crack her serene composure. "Tell him I can spare 15 minutes after I finish reviewing these applications," Tsara replied without looking up from the documents that commanded her attention. The applications represented young people seeking opportunities to gain real-world experience in various professional fields, and their futures took precedence over her husband's emotional turmoil. When she finally joined him in the morning room 20 minutes later, the Tsara found Rafferty pacing with the restless energy of someone who had been rehearsing arguments and counter-arguments for hours. His appearance showed signs of strain. Shadows under his eyes, a slight tremor in his hands, the hollow look of someone who had been sleeping poorly for weeks. "Tsara," he began without preamble, "we need to talk about Cordelia." She settled into her preferred chair with the fluid grace that had become second nature, arranging her silk dress with unconscious elegance, while maintaining the neutral expression she reserved for unpleasant business discussions. "What about her?" "She's gone," Rafferty announced, watching his wife's face for some reaction that never materialized. "She left last week, said she was tired of playing. Second to a woman who had already won everything that mattered." The Tsara absorbed this information with the same detached interest she might show for weather reports about distant cities. "I see, and you're telling me this because—" The absence of surprise, hurt, satisfaction, or any other emotional response clearly unnerved Rafferty, who had expected some acknowledgement that this development changed the dynamics between them. Instead, he faced a woman who seemed to regard his personal drama as irrelevant to her daily concerns. "Because it means we can start over," he said with the desperate optimism of someone clinging to sinking wreckage. "We can rebuild our marriage without complications." The Tsara studied her husband with the clinical detachment of someone observing a mildly interesting psychological phenomenon. "Rafferty, Cordelia was never the problem in our marriage. She was merely a symptom of problems that existed long before she appeared." "What do you mean?" he asked, though his tone suggested he feared the answer. "I mean that removing a symptom does not cure the underlying disease. Your relationship with her was possible because you had already abandoned our marriage emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. Her presence simply made that abandonment visible to others." Each word landed with surgical precision, cutting through his illusions about easy solutions and convenient scapegoats. Rafferty had hoped that ending his affair would create space for reconciliation, but instead he discovered that his wife had moved beyond the realm where his choices affected her happiness. "But surely, now that she's gone, we can work on rebuilding trust," he persisted, his voice carrying the pleading note of someone who had run out of better options. "Trust." Thesara repeated thoughtfully, as if examining the concept for its practical applications. Trust is not rebuilt, Rafferty. Trust is earned through consistent actions over extended periods of time. You cannot recreate something you never possessed in the first place. The statement hung between them with devastating clarity. Rafferty was forced to confront the reality that their marriage had been built on assumptions and conveniences rather than genuine mutual respect and understanding. Thesara had never truly trusted him. She had simply hoped that her trust might prove justified over time. Then what would it take? He asked desperately. What would I need to do to earn your trust now? Thesara rose and walked to the windows that overlooked the gardens where spring flowers were beginning their annual resurrection. When she turned back to face him, her expression carried the patient weariness of someone explaining obvious facts to a willfully obtuse student. You're asking the wrong question, Rafferty. The question is not what you would need to do to earn my trust. The question is why you believe my trust is still available to be earned. The distinction was subtle but crushing. Rafferty had assumed that his wife's lack of emotional reaction meant her feelings were simply dormant, waiting to be reawakened by appropriate gestures. Instead, he was discovering that her feelings had been replaced by something far more daunting, complete indifference to his emotional state. "You're my wife," he said weakly, as if the legal designation itself constituted an argument for her continued availability. "I am your wife, in the same way that I am a citizen of this country." Thesara replied with devastating logic. "It is a legal status that confers certain rights and obligations, but it does not require emotional investment or personal devotion." Her response reduced their marriage to what it had actually become, a business arrangement involving shared assets and legal responsibilities, but devoid of the intimacy, partnership, and mutual respect that defined genuine matrimony. Rafferty sank into the chair across from her, finally beginning to comprehend the magnitude of what he had lost. "So there's nothing I can do? No way to win you back?" "Win me back?" Thesara's laugh was musical and utterly without warmth. "Rafferty, you never won me in the first place. I was given to you through family arrangements and social expectations. The woman you married was performing a role she thought was expected of her. That woman is gone. Then who are you now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am who I always had the potential to be once I stopped trying to be who others wanted me to be. I'm a woman who builds businesses, transforms communities, and earns respect through competence rather than compliance. I'm someone whose presence enhances other people's lives and whose absence would be genuinely mourned." Each description highlighted the contrast between the woman she had become and the wife he had abandoned. Thesara had not simply survived his neglect, she had used it as an opportunity to discover capabilities and strengths that marriage to an attentive husband might never have revealed. "I want to be part of that life," Rafferty said with increasing desperation. "I want to support your work, to be a real partner in what you're building." Thesara returned to her chair and fixed him with a steady gaze that seemed to see straight through his protests to the motivations beneath. "Partnership requires mutual contribution, Rafferty. What would you contribute to my life that is not already abundantly provided by my work, my community relationships, and my own capabilities?" Each of his suggestions met the same fate: practical refutation based on her demonstrated independence and success. Rafferty was discovering that his wife had not been waiting for his return, but had instead built a life so complete that his presence would represent a step backward rather than forward. "Thesara, please," he said finally, abandoning all pretense of logical argument in favor of naked pleading. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm begging you for another chance." She regarded him with something that might have been pity, but it was the distant pity one might feel for strangers suffering misfortunes they had brought upon themselves. "Your regret is not my concern, Rafferty. Your presence in this house is tolerated for the sake of legal convenience and family harmony, nothing more." The words carried the finality of a business decision rather than an emotional rejection. Thesara was not punishing him or trying to hurt him. She was simply stating facts about their current relationship with the same detachment she might use to describe weather conditions. As Rafferty left the morning room, his shoulders sagging under the weight of complete defeat, Thesara returned to her internship applications. Young people seeking professional experience represented the future she was, helping to build, a future that had no place for those who confused regret with repentance, or presence with partnership. The wall of steel was not defensive, it was simply the natural barrier that existed between people who had chosen different values and different priorities. Rafferty's desperate attempts to scale it only demonstrated how completely he misunderstood both its purpose and its permanence. Chapter 10. The Crown of Triumph. True power is not in commanding others to kneel, but in inspiring them to stand taller than they believed possible. September arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that made everything seem possible. And with it came the culmination of Thesara's transformation from abandoned bride to acknowledged queen of both family and community. The Whitmore estate had become the unofficial headquarters for the county's most ambitious development project, a comprehensive initiative to create an innovation district that would attract technology companies, educational institutions, and research facilities to the region. The Grand Ballroom, which had hosted family reunion celebrations just 6 months earlier, was now configured as a conference center where governors, university presidents, and corporate executives gathered to finalize agreements that would transform the economic landscape for generations. Thesara moved through these high-level negotiations with the confidence of someone whose expertise was universally recognized and actively sought. Mrs. Whitmore announced Governor Patricia Hayes as she reviewed the final development contracts. This initiative represents exactly the kind of public-private partnership that other states are trying to replicate. Your vision for sustainable economic growth has become the national model. The comment was overheard by a room full of people whose opinions shaped policy and directed investment across the region. Thesara had earned their respect through 15 months of demonstrated competence, innovative thinking, and consistent results that exceeded every projection. But the morning's triumph was interrupted by an unexpected disturbance in the foyer. Raised voices and urgent footsteps announced the arrival of someone who had not been invited to participate in these crucial negotiations. Through the ballroom's tall windows, Thesara could see Rafferty climbing the front steps with the determined stride of someone who had finally resolved to take dramatic action. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess," Thesara suggested to the assembled dignitaries, her voice maintaining perfect composure despite the obvious disruption approaching their serious deliberations. Before anyone could respond, Rafferty burst through the ballroom doors with the theatrical desperation of someone who had convinced himself that grand gestures could substitute for consistent character. He was disheveled in a way that suggested sleepless nights and liquid courage, his usually perfect appearance compromised by wrinkled clothing and bloodshot eyes. The room fell silent as 43 of the county's most influential leaders watched this unexpected drama unfold. University presidents, corporate executives, government officials, and community leaders found themselves witnessing a personal crisis that threatened to derail important public business. "Thesara," Rafferty announced in a voice that carried across the entire ballroom, "I need to say something in front of everyone who matters to both of us." The phrase "everyone who matters" was telling in its assumptions. Rafferty still believed that public witnesses would somehow pressure his wife into responding favorably to whatever declaration he planned to make. He had failed to understand that these witnesses were present as her colleagues and partners. not as neutral observers of their domestic arrangements. This is neither the time nor the place for personal conversations, Thesara replied with the kind of firm authority that commanded boardrooms and silenced opposition. We are conducting important business that affects thousands of people's futures. But Rafferty had apparently committed himself to this course of action beyond the possibility of dignified retreat. In front of the most powerful people in the state, he dropped to his knees on the polished marble floor with the melodramatic flourish of someone who had confused performance with sincerity. "I abandoned the strongest woman I ever knew," he declared, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm begging for it in front of everyone who can see what I threw away through my own stupidity and selfishness." The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Governor Hayes exchanged glances with the university presidents, while corporate executives studied their documents with the fixed attention of people pretending not to witness someone's emotional breakdown. The scene was simultaneously dramatic and deeply inappropriate for the professional setting. Thesara remained standing, her posture perfect and her expression unchanged, as she processed this public attempt at emotional manipulation. Rafferty's grand gesture revealed more about his desperation than his repentance. He was performing regret rather than feeling it, seeking public pressure rather than private reconciliation. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned the respect of everyone present through competence rather than dramatics. "Rafferty, you are correct that you abandoned someone of value, but you are mistaken about several important facts." She paused, allowing the room's complete attention to focus on her response to this unprecedented situation. Every person present understood that they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. First, forgiveness is not a gift to be granted or withheld. It is a responsibility that one accepts when someone has demonstrated genuine understanding of their failures and committed to meaningful change. "You have demonstrated neither understanding nor commitment." Her words carried the weight of judicial pronouncement, final and unappealable. Rafferty's face showed growing comprehension that his dramatic gesture was not producing the desired effect. "Second, you left me when I was yours, and I rose without you. I did not rise in spite of your abandonment. I rose because of it. Your absence allowed me to discover capabilities and strengths that your presence might never have revealed." The statement reframed his neglect not as something that had harmed her, but as something that had inadvertently liberated her to become who she was always meant to be. The assembled dignitaries nodded slightly, recognizing the logic of someone who had transformed adversity into opportunity. "Third, if you truly regret your choices, prove it with your actions over years, not with your tears in this moment. Regret expressed through public theater is not repentance. It is manipulation." The final sentence landed with devastating precision, exposing the calculated nature of his supposedly spontaneous emotional outburst. Rafferty had hoped that public witnesses would pressure Thesara into accepting his apology, but instead they had witnessed her complete dismantling of his attempt at emotional manipulation. "And finally," Thesara continued, her voice gathering the strength that had made her a natural leader, "a woman is never weak. We are the roots that hold the house stable and the honor that holds the family together. When a man abandons us, we don't fall. We rise, and when we rise, we lift everything around us." The applause began slowly, with Governor Hayes bringing her hands together in deliberate recognition of someone who had turned a personal attack into a public affirmation of strength and dignity. It spread through the room like recognition of truth that transcended the specific situation to encompass universal principles about leadership, resilience, and grace under pressure. University President Dr. Margaret Foster stood as she applauded, her gesture immediately followed by the corporate executives who had watched Thesara transform crisis into opportunity with masterful skill. Soon the entire room was standing, their sustained applause acknowledging not just her response to this moment, but her 15 months of exceptional leadership that had brought them all together. As the applause finally subsided and the dignitaries returned to their serious discussions about economic development, Rafferty found himself facing a room full of people who had completely dismissed his existence. Several attendees actually turned their backs to him as they resumed conversations with Thesara, their body language making clear that his presence was not just unwelcome, but irrelevant. Dr. Foster approached Thesara with renewed admiration. "Mrs. Whitmore, what we just witnessed was a masterclass in leadership under pressure. Your ability to transform a personal attack into a universal statement about strength and dignity. That's the kind of character we need in positions of genuine authority." The comment sparked a chorus of similar observations from other attendees, who began sharing specific examples of how Thesara's leadership had influenced their own professional approaches. Judge Morrison spoke about incorporating her conflict resolution strategies into his courtroom management. Governor Hayes discussed adapting Thesara's community engagement models for statewide initiatives. "You've become more than a local leader," observed Dr. Patricia Wong, the president of State University. "You've become a case study in transformational leadership that we're already incorporating into our business school curriculum." As he reached the door, several people watched his departure with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. But most had already turned their attention back to Thesara's presentation about sustainable growth strategies. His humiliation was complete, but more importantly, it was irrelevant to the important work being conducted by competent people. "Mrs. Whitmore," Governor Hayes said as the afternoon sessions concluded, "today has demonstrated exactly why you've become the most respected leader in this region. Your ability to maintain focus and dignity under pressure is precisely what we need in positions of genuine responsibility." The comment was echoed by others as the day's participants prepared to leave, each carrying with them renewed appreciation for someone who had shown that true strength was measured not by the ability to dominate others, but by the capacity to elevate everything around her. As evening settled over the estate and the last of the dignitaries departed with signed contracts worth millions in regional investment, Thesara stood in her study, surrounded by the tangible evidence of her triumph. The Innovation District agreements lay spread across her desk, documents that would create thousands of jobs, attract prestigious institutions, and transform the economic landscape for generations. But beyond the financial impact, the day had established something even more valuable: her reputation as a leader whose character could withstand any personal attack while maintaining focus on what truly mattered. The business community had witnessed her grace under fire and emerged with enhanced respect for her capabilities. Maria entered with the evening's correspondence, which included invitations from 3 additional states, requesting consultation on community development projects. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said with obvious pride, "I've never seen anyone handle such a difficult situation with such dignity. The entire staff is talking about how you turned that awful scene into something inspiring." Miriam joined her as she organized the final documents, her expression carrying decades of family wisdom and genuine pride. "My dear," she said quietly, "today proved what I've known for months. You are not just the heart of this family, you are its crown jewel." The metaphor was apt. Thesara had indeed become the family's most precious asset, someone whose presence enhanced their reputation and whose achievements reflected credit on their name. The abandoned bride of 15 months ago had been replaced by a queen who had earned her crown through service, intelligence, and unwavering dignity. The transformation was complete, irreversible, and built on foundations strong enough to support whatever challenges the future might bring. The Tsara had discovered that power was not about controlling others, but about empowering them. That strength was not about avoiding adversity, but about transforming it into opportunity. And that true victory was not about defeating enemies, but about becoming someone whose success lifted everyone around her. As the grandfather clock chimed the end of another day, the Tsara smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had built something permanent and valuable from the temporary pain of betrayal. The crown of triumph was not made of gold or jewels. It was forged from character, competence, and the consistent choice to be someone worthy of the respect she had earned. The end, present-day victory. The Tsara stands victorious, not as a woman who waited for redemption, but as one who created her own crown from the ashes of betrayal.